My last YouTube video, I did a little walkthrough of the intermodal container craziness, and I mentioned there that I was totally missing the mark, that the intermodal container is actually about the different modes of transport, and I got carried away into the container transport that would carry multiple containers. The reality is, when I'm looking at this situation, my the intermodal container, I think, is a really good idea, and I really hope that that discussion perhaps continues at some future point. That there is some intermodal decision made about an intermodal container that some of the players agree to and decide upon. That even if we can't actually have a container dock to a hover vessel, where we actually have a small vessel dock to a hover vessel or a small vessel to small vessel, but at least we can create the illusion of it. And maybe, who knows, eventually maybe the game developers will give us some sort of semi-universal docking. The only hint I've heard of any sort of universal or anything along that lines is at one point in the threads, they had a question, what was the interest in HV to SV docking? So for the SVs to be able to carry an SV, or for SV to be able to carry an HV, I believe was what it was. And there was some interest, but there's been, other than that poll, which was some time ago, I have not. We've been through a couple alpha versions now, and there's still been no sign of anything to do with that in the game. Not to say that I know what they're developing, I have no idea. But at least what we've seen in the game, there's nothing leading me to believe that we're going to see. Other than that thread, there's been nothing since. So what I'm going to look at here is some of the stuff, from my concept stuff. Over here, I have the Condor, which was going to be one of my container transports. As I got caught up in this container stuff, I'm reevaluating the transport here, and among other things, as I'm evaluating it, I have come to the realization that I would like to change how I am transporting something like the 0G module. Here I had done up some brackets that it could be slid into. Later at some point I was going to try to get creative and making these look like they might actually be docking brackets for the 0G module, but at this point I don't think I'm going to worry about it. I think I'm just going to completely go through a different change of plan here. Up here along the ridge, I had these spots where you could put the Aegis container. One of the things I was doing, and this is probably why the intermodal containers really grabbed me, one was the timing of it, as I was doing some work on some of my stuff, and it caught me at the right time. But I think it's also because I already had planned that I would have this container transport, and other than that bay back there at the end, the stuff, there wasn't going to be any of my own designs that would be containers and stuff. There was a hangar inside this thing. It's actually quite hollow in the interior there. I could have a bunch of my small vessels in there, small vessels, hover vessels. But the actual exterior here was going to be a container transport. I'm really rethinking how I'm going to do this here. But it looks like here I might readapt my concept on the ridge, completely redo how I'm doing the docking of the 0G modules, and that back there, strip that out and completely redo that for a complete redesign of my own vessel in this sense, picking up a whole series of containers. So as I've been thinking about that, I've been experimenting over here. Stuff. We'll start with one of the things is I did some math, and I was trying to figure out what sort of area, if I did my own container system, what sort of area could I then build a a large facility for docking that I have a whole bunch of containers in there. Really give, as I said, that container transport, multiple containers on it going on. And so I basically came up with this space here. As you can see here, I'm just experimenting. This is just, change my orientation. Fit here I got three containers of similar size, all stacked up here. These are not, so I do have a container that I've been working on patterned after the 0G module, but it is not the containers for the system that I was planning. It's just experimenting, stacking a bunch of these in here, seeing if I could then use force fields so that you could actually have an O2 field around there. Here the orientation, let me change the orientation. This is to get the scale of some of the other containers that were, for example, the Aegis container, definitely not something that can be stacked, but I just want to get an idea of how it compared to the area. And then we have a couple other cargo containers here that for reference. I was the one area, yes, I have the force fields going on and stuff, and I'm really inclined to think I'm going to go with that because you really get the container transport effect going on. This here, I was experimenting with taking that space, building actual protection around it, the stuff. So you would just basically have an area that you'd have the containers stashed in there, protected by the doors, and then theoretically put on a shield on top of that. The doors here. This was intentional because as I was experimenting with my container stuff, I got a empty container. A quick reminder and lesson in the fact that there's a lot of extra thrust up to the idea being so that once you hit in gravity, you can then carry a fair load in the container vessel. So having a axis on top would be easier for getting in and out, because that's where it's going to shoot right on up once you click the button. But this here, the side, that would be more for visual. Here I was experimenting with doing ramps and force fields and trying to line things up and see what I could do. It doesn't line up exactly, but it's kind of, I'm like, oh yeah, I can work with that, something close. The issue I run into here though is once I start moving in and out, even though the ramp itself can be moved out of the way, this little piece down here I would end up bumping that, throwing my containers off. This is not my previous video I had a whole bunch of stacks. This is what I believe my container vessels are going to be. This is the 2U. I'm going to have a 1U, which is this basically split in half, and a 4U, which is two of these essentially side by side. Then I'll have another series of container ships that'll be bigger, and then I will actually have one of the things I hadn't put on the workshop yet at all, but I've been working on is, and part of the reason I decided that this is the way I'm going, is I was also building some capital vessels that would essentially be modules that could be inserted into a starbase, or they would be capital vessels, but they would be modules that you could put in, remove, put in one, put in to exchange them in and out. The idea being that you could have a 7500 CPU starbase or ground base, and you could then switch in and out these modules to change function, purpose, and essentially get yourself more storage than the 7500 CPU limit. seems to have associated with it. However, again, we don't have the semi-universal docking, so it really wouldn't capital vessel docking. Capital vessel won't work. They don't actually dock to a base, but since the base isn't moving at all, you essentially just park it there in the slot. And I've already experimented with this, and you can arrange it so that you essentially just walk right out the doors of the capital vessel into the base. It won't share fuel, but as far as the O2, as long as that area where you're parking the capital vessel is in, it'll get its O2 from the base, as long as that is a O2 sealed area of the base. So it's one of those things that, so I was figuring that you could have the 1U, 2U, 4U, those will be your small sizes, then there'll be a medium size, also built in small vessel blocks, and then you move on up to a small capital vessel that'd be in the next level of the stuff of container. In this case, I am just looking at here, this is my experimentation with spaces here. What sort of, instead of just a flat, ramps, but I'm losing a lot of space in the ramps. That's mostly here on we're trying to do something above. Again, trying to do the launch. As I said, my containers, I'm starting to actually put together actual containers. I have a lot of thrust up so that they can operate in gravity for moving, because we don't have that semi-universal docking. You can't actually take another small vessel with the appropriate thrust, dock it on, and lift the container. That'd be more of a space engineer's thing. This is Empyrean. We don't get that. So it's not like I can dock to something and then move it with the vehicle. I just docked with it. And we don't have small vessel to small vessel, so I really don't get that. So the containers themselves have to move themselves at this time. Maybe eventually we'll get something different. Okay, so as you can see here, I experimented with that space. The force fields, as I mentioned, or I believe I did, and so the O2 space, putting in this, stacking up two 0G modules and my imitation. I figured, my goal here with my container transport is to do what I don't see much other players do. At least I have not seen them myself yet, and that's this is why the that forum discussion in the thread, that thread discussion in the forums really got my interest there, is because I was trying to do something I don't see other players really doing, and that is actually use other people's containers, their container transports. Building my container transports to haul other players' containers. Actual. So a lot of the container transports I see in the workshop are typically transports built by the same person who built the container stuff. So I was here experimenting with different things. This one here, that actually the dimensions of where these are docked, that actually represents the current ridge line on the Condor. So the Condor could haul that. That's looking kind of lonely by itself. Could haul one of those. Let's see. This, and I want to say that this Aegis container is also stacked and similar stuff. Being parked in the middle, it doesn't look quite like it's out of place there so much. That one, again, if I parked it to the middle, it probably look like it filled the space a little better, but you can really kind of see the a little bit of the scale of the size there. I had really built the ridge line along that my vessel for the Aegis container, but one of the things I'm looking at is and there now someone had mentioned some sizes of a intermodal container. It was the last I saw on the thread. Someone mentioning some dimensions, sizes that they were able to pull off. I started to work something up. I really, I didn't like where it was, my container was going. I actually am through in here. You can see an actual container in there. The thrusters, it was, I had my math. It was going to be able to lift the mass of that container filled. It was, but I don't know. It didn't speak to me. And so I stopped. I didn't fill it in. I didn't, it's like, no, maybe if I came back to it another time, start over, I can figure out what'll make me happy. But what I'm looking at is a slightly different ridge, considering that for the Condor, changing up the ridge, not just the cages, building some sort of cages where I'd have the actual real look at the container transport, but maybe the ridge as well where I'm transporting containers. So if I change up the ridge, maybe I could actually have 4 of these side by side instead of just 3. Maybe I'd make it a little bit a wider ridge, and I could get 2 of those containers side by side. Then I was, like, well, if I'm going and checking out my options stuff, how wide would it need to be to have, 2 of the Aegis containers side by side? So I was just experimenting here, just testing out various possibilities as I looked at it. Now that 2U container here, it is vessel. It doesn't yet have the container in it. I have on another spreadsheet, this isn't a spreadsheet I'm looking at, but on a spreadsheet I have figured out these thrusters. This thruster arrangement on it is very intentional, including some medium jets on it. That the idea that this should be able to lift, I want to say, I'd have to look at my spreadsheet, but somewhere around 130 tons of cargo, and I plan to give it about a 13K SU container, which filled with promethium, at least last I was looking, should equate to 130 tons. So it would have enough to lift it. Oh, and that's in 2Gs, 2 times gravity. So it would be able to do that in a 2G environment, lift 130 tons, filled, and stuff. So that was my plan. So that is this is the 2U. We can take a quick look here. Pretty empty in there. It's just the power systems. As I said, the container yet to be built in there, but this is turning out better than my initial draft of an entrance. The initial draft I had for this just wasn't looking right. It was horrible. But doing that first draft, I then came to this draft, this, and I'm like, I think I can live with that, and I'll work with that. If I'm lucky, I might have one of the 1U containers in. No, I don't. One of the things I'm looking here is this is the remodel of my Pelican. It's a work in progress. I thought I was near completion, that I would just need to do some interior paint and texture work just to finish it up, polish it off. Now we're looking at having shields, so I'm like, do I add shields to it? Another thing I'm looking at as well is the signals on this was designed so that when you pull your small vessel, hover vessel up forward, I don't think I will trigger it walking in, because I try to be very careful that just walking, it would take 2 players to trigger the signal to turn on that red light. One would have to be moving over here, and one would have to be moving I think actually you'd have to be jumping up here. Stuff. I think I'd have to look at it, my signal work on it again. But I wanted to make it difficult for just players to set off that red light. But it was basically a red parking light warning, that you're about to collide with the rack. Well, I can fit the 1U container, which is half that 2U. I can actually fit it in that door. I can fit it up here, but I have to pull it up pretty darn close to the rack. which means I've got the red light on for a bit instead of just pulling in, having the red light come on, and then just park and dock my vessel there. So it's one of those things I'm, debating is do I make the Pelican? Do I just go in here and say, okay, I'm going to make it 2 blocks wider, 4 meters wider, 1 block is essentially on each side to make those bays, that extra block, so then it can take, it wouldn't be what I had intended when I started making the 1U container. It wasn't what I intended when I made the Pelican, but could, since it's so close, could I then, do I go ahead and do that? Do I make the Pelican wider to so that the signal work on it will work better with the 1U container, and so you actually could park it in those bays. There are some other advantages. I could then give me a little more depth to work with for my Swallow SV, maybe some enhancement to that. So there are some temptations, some things to consider, stuff. But this is my Pelican capital vessel that I'm having to think about. Do I make further adjustment to it? When I get finished with this will replace the one on the workshop. For those who are not aware, I'm actually, in many respects, I am building these collections, and these are, basically works in progress and drafts as I go along. It's the game that changes and adapts. I try to adapt them as my philosophy on what they should be changes and adapts. So also do my designs. But I really do like the Pelican here. I think someone called it a tramp freighter, and I'm like, yeah, I like it. Granted, with some of the changes to containers, those are probably gonna have to be updated. Yeah, and it wasn't my purpose to give you a tour of the Pelican. I just telling you that the discussion on the containers has got me really thinking about it. One of the things I'm thinking about doing is also possibly putting up some rails on this pad and seeing about doing something there, like it's got a place to stick some containers on top of it. I'm not sure so much. I might just do more of the widen it and put the 1Us in there. I might decide, because this isn't really supposed to be a container transport. This is supposed to be a kind of like a light freighter, and some of the changes and adaptations to it, I think it make it much more that freighter I had in mind for it. Okay, now one of the things up here you may or may not noticed, well, I'm making a point of it anyways, so is the Tactician's Aegis cargo transport, early one, and I might it's the cargo container that really caught my interest. The cargo transport is, I lost myself, I got my turned around. Oh, there it is. Okay, they had built that so that you could stack. It carries 6 of the Aegis containers. They're wrapped around it, very similar to the somewhat triangular formation that I've saw these being used on a container transport by the creator of these Colonial Mover containers. So well, one of the things I noticed is the Aegis container is very similar depth to what I'm using for my 2U. It's wider. So it was one of those things. I wasn't planning this. This was unplanned, and it is a bit small for the space, but I had to. After realizing that it was so close, I'm like, yeah, it parks, it fits. Okay. So yeah, just a little quick, well, maybe not the quickest, but a little tour here of stuff that's going through my head and stuff. I'm really hoping the discussion for the intermodal containers continues and reaches some sort of conclusion. Um, if this is as I said, this is built to the dimensions that someone was on the thread they mentioned. However, I really don't like the look of what I got. They had an example that they put together, looked a lot better. Um, so, but yeah, if that ends up being or something else, um, this project, with the remodeling the Condor is still a long ways off from completion. I haven't even started ripping that thing apart yet to, you know, rebuild it. So there's still plenty of opportunity for me to consider what's going on. Uh, Now I haven't been participating in that thread so much lately, the past week or so. I've actually gotten, by doing so, by separating myself from the threads a little bit and backing off, I've gotten a lot more building done in this past week. Really got um, some stuff that got me a bit excited and really happy with how things are might be going forward. And here I'm going to go. It's going to be a little trip over there. I know it's going to waste a little time. I probably should have done this if I had realized I was going to be chatting so long, and just I could have started this on its journey over here to the containers. I have not done the larger containers yet. I'm just doing the 1U, 2U, and 4U. I have done the math for those, and what and the 1U, it's got the container and it is functional. I just need to finish some texture and paint work on it, and then it's one of those things. I will probably leave them in my personal works until there's something on the workshop for them to work with. The fact that the Aegis container transport might actually work with them might be one of those things where I am tempted to go ahead and whoa, I just crashed into something, didn't I? But it stopped me. Okay. So, whoops. Not what I had in mind. This is what I had in mind. Actually get out of my seat. Go take a little tour here. Stuff. My proposal for the 1U. Little door here. Got a cockpit. Stuff. Can't see very well out those little windows, but these are built into those crossbars. And so a little bit of a change from what the previous video stuff borrowed a little bit of it from the previous mock-up of the containers stuff, but made some changes to it. I like how it's for me. I like what it's developed into a bit here. So the 1U here, this one, as I said, it is functional, and if we hit it's got 11,000 SU capacity on its container, and if I've done my math right, it should be able to lift 110 tons in 2 times gravity. So again, if I've done my math right, it should be quite functional for actually moving around the mass it can hold. Here, as you can see, that one, I'm repeating the pattern on the front here. This one, I hadn't put the cockpit in yet. That's something I kind of tossed together on my my works with all the trying to figure out what I'm doing with the container transport itself. With this, I made it a bit longer, follow the pattern, and so this is the 2U. Granted, it's not going. The actual container is not going to be twice the capacity of the container. Among other things, the part of it is keeping it to that 7500 CPU, or for the vessel, which means that you know, but I'm balancing thrust, balancing everything with this, and so I only ended up with I want to say my math. Again, I haven't put the container in here yet, but my math is I should be able to, at 7500 CPU, put a 13,000 SU container in here with these thrusters and be able to still lift it up in 2 times gravity with 130 tons. So, and that's 130 tons of cargo, in addition to the weight of the vessel itself. Okay, then over here, this one, as you can see, I don't have any I haven't punched holes in it yet for the thrusters or completed it. Stuff. This will be, in this case, since it's larger size, I can use some of the medium jets more frequently in this, and I should then, with the CPU savings, be able to put a larger container in it. Again, plan is to still be able to lift and operate in 2 times gravity, but use that CPU savings to find a new balance where I might get, if I'm lucky, 160 tons and 16,000 CPU capacity, or 16,000 SU capacity for that container. Now, I have also done the math. If I were to build an HV almost entirely granted, there will be a bunch of the HVUL, but the stuff. So I gave myself some tonnage buffer for the various blocks, steel blocks, carbon fiber, truss blocks, everything that goes into that. I'm not sure how well my estimate will work out, but I did the basic math that if I were to take the 1U container, since it's going to be the one that I can actually get a decent amount of SU and thrusters and everything else, but mostly they get the SU into a small space for just 7500 CPU. Granted, I'm looking forward to the CPU system actually getting polished and refined at some point, but since I don't know where it's going, I just kind of I work with what it is right now. But yeah, to get something like this, it would be the most compact. And the idea being that it'll probably stay that way once they get CPU refined. These things will probably get better containers, better arrangements of thrusters, and become more capable once they polish out CPU. But the idea being is that if I use this one as my current standard, I figure I can build an HV that you could put 4 of these on there. So there'd be enough room for that 4U container. 4 of these on there on the HV. So I wanted to say my math was about 500 tons total with the vessel, and 100 tons each in cargo. And I could build that HV, and it should be functional, be able to hover, be able to move stuff. And it's just the question would be when I try to come up with some concept for what it might actually look like and stuff, I can get as long as it can stay within my model, I should be able to haul those. Granted, when I build the HV, since we don't actually have SV to HV docking and stuff, what I'll end up doing is building that HV and just totally ignoring. I'll build the core HV to that 7500 CPU, and granted, by that time I finally get to it, probably the system's going to be changed up. Things are going to be changed by that point. I probably, unless I crank it out here quick, and I usually don't, It's probably not going to hit in Alpha 10 where I get that done. But basically the idea is I then, the HV would have the capability of moving that much tonnage, according to my math. And since I don't anticipate that we'll have actual SV to HV docking, what I would end up doing is just basically build the core HV to 7500 CPU or whatever the system is at that time, and then totally blow the CPU out the door to actually build these containers on top of that HV or part of the HV. So it would look like the container was parked there, but it would actually be part of the HV itself, just because I can't, um, can't get what I really want. And that's where doing this recessed docking on these landing gear would probably come in really handy, is because that when I build that HV, I can, basically ignore the fact of the spacing. It would look really, other than the fact that the HVs don't have actual landing gear, and even if they did, they would be retracted in like this, so you'd have some differences, than compared to a docked vessel. I'd probably just be using the dock pads recessed in there, and then just here, it would be flat against the the bed of the HV, just like it would if it was docked, because the recessed docking, that's how it would be docked, is right up against it. So yeah, that is my plan, eventually, to build that stuff. As I said, I've done the math. I just have no idea. I did some initial sketch of what I thought an HV might be, but then I was like, no, that's not going to work. But at least, initial idea might lead to other ideas. I might even build my initial idea in creative, and maybe that'll inspire me. Like some of this stuff, as I've been playing with it, stuff may inspire me to actually figure out, oh, this is what the HV is going to look like, what it's going to be. Okay. So, and so yeah, that is my works. And well, yeah, why not I give you a quick tour? This is another incomplete project. I have lots of incomplete projects. This here, I'm really hoping at some point they really do something with CPU, because I would really like this to actually have far more container storage than just this one here for a 1,400, or not 1,400, 14,000 SU on this massive vessel, and it's only got that much storage on it. I cannot recall my math off the top of my head how much tonnage this thing can lift. I'd have to go again look at my spreadsheets. I want to say I gave it extra capacity for lift, but it might be that it can only handle 140 tons. But I really want to say it's more, in the hopes that they'll eventually do something with CPU where I could put more on this. I'm really taking advantage of the height, that instead of just 3.5 meters, that 4.5 meters of the 0G module. And as you can see, I actually have large jets in here. That helps me save CPU on this thing. And let's see what it was. It is currently 7,500 CPU. So it's maxed out on its CPU. As I said, I think I left some extra lift on this. So if they improve the CPU system, so you could actually get more container in there, I want to say that you can, and it'll still be able to lift. The thing is, my calculation is based on 2G. So even if I'm off on my calculation, leaving a buffer in 1G, you can definitely put more container in that thing. and it'll lift in 1G. So it's yeah, that's and as I said, these my smaller, so my 1U, my 2U, my 4U, and as I said, the 1U actually will fit in those bays. I'm not going to attempt that right now because it worked, but it was something I'm pretty sure I will mess up if I just try to do it. I'm not that practiced. I did it once, and that's it. Well, I've rambled on long enough. I've given you a little tour of my current works and uh, my works. Granted, I'm currently here. This is an Alpha 10 experimental creative game. Uh, so I've had access to a few additional shapes and sizes of blocks as I've been building these things. I don't anticipate having this ready before um, Alpha 10. This yeah, it takes me a while on these things, and I do plan to have something to go with when I release them. As I said, the fact that the Aegis transport will work with, they can dock to that. There might be some temptation to go ahead and just release these earlier and just basically link a link over to the Aegis transport saying, yeah, hey, use our competitors' transport to haul our containers. But for me, this has been a project I didn't actually plan on doing because, as I said, my container transports. I was just mostly going to use. I wasn't even going to build that. That's a complete. That's going, as you see, it's called the fledgling. It's going to replace my fledgling on the workshop. That fledgling was a concept proof of what you could do with 7500 CPU, building a 16K container with mobility and stuff. But with actual mass and volume, it really could struggle to lift the 160 tons it could fit in that container. In this case, I'm giving, and it didn't really have a fit into my FTB collection. It's where I stuck it because that's where my transports and freight theme is going on. But it really didn't stuff. So that they're giving it, modeling it after the 0G container a bit to fit the same general space. That will become the fledgling. It'll replace. Yes, it'll be a smaller container, but it will be fully functional and higher and 2G filled with that, with the container filled with some mild atmospheric tolerance as well. So, yeah, I think it'll fit. Then it'll fit the FTB collection. It'll actually replace and fit for it. So these carry-ons, I was planning to build a much bigger vessel. It was going to be called the carry-on. I was tempted to continue that name through with the larger ones, but when I was looking at the different scales and the sizes of this, the small assortment, the medium assortment, and the large, I was like, well, I think carry-on for a for your air travel, that's your small luggage. Well, then the name carry-on got transferred to here. My mid-size, I'm currently planning to call the Mort. So they have a Mort 8U, 16U, and 32U. And then the DCEs will be the capital vessel as a module that can be inserted into a base, and it will be patterned. I will not restrict myself to those shapes, the crossbars and stuff. I may carry those through. I'm not sure how that's exactly going to work out, but yeah, I will build those for the large size for the carrying through the little pattern after that little 1U container. And granted, I'm probably only going to do it in that size. I don't anticipate doing it in the larger sizes because it's going to be a module for inserted into a base. So unless I'm building bases that have accommodations for various sizes of these, it's probably just going to be a one size module fit into those bases, and it'll be a continuation of this. The cargo the cargo base module will be the FTB. I plan to do a manufacturing and farming base modules. Those will be my inspiration trader collection, and then I may do a module that's like a medical facility, and maybe another one that's some sort of medical facility. I know I'm going to do that. I'm not sure about if I'm going to do others and stuff, but the idea is to be these different modules that can be switched in and out on my some of my bases, which means I'm going to remodel some of my bases to accommodate those. But yeah, as I build the system, so my various collections will have some interconnection with those modules. I am tempted to do some interconnection with some other stuff as well, but I think mostly this container system is going to be, and the ability to, really making sure I have the ability to transport other types of containers on my transports will be the FTB. Yeah. So, and the FTB will, I'll have my container transports. I'll have some, light freighters, and then I was planning also to do some ferries for hauling HVs. Not to say that there won't be HV transports in the other collections, but this will be the one that will, actually have ones that are. The idea is that that's what they are. Oh, I've rambled. I've gone off topic. Enjoy this little tour of some of my works in progress. As I said, some of these are probably not going to hit the workshop until I have something more to go with them. The fledgling, once I get that finished, I'll update the workshop for that. Not only is the fledgling currently on the workshop in its very crude form that doesn't have anything to do with anything other than a demonstration purposes, this I can update it, put that on there, and it fits to the 0G, the Charon X or Charon X or however it's supposed to be announced. I've tested it. It docks. It's compatible. Unless I messed it up again. I had already had a mistake earlier I had to fix, and so. But yeah, it should when it's complete. And when I got to figure out what I'm doing with that, because as I said, I may with these, with this change with the containers. I mean, there is that temptation to give it that expansion due to that unplanned capacity. Well, have a good day.